Checkpoint is presented by GM Pharma, the first international multinational pharmaceutical company in Georgia. GM Pharma, to serve those who need it most.
More on investments. The Netherlands is a very important strategic partner for our country as we cooperate not only politically but economically and financially as well. Last week we were fortunate enough to host the ambassador of the Netherlands to Georgia, Maaike van Koldam at BMG. Our analyst Georgy Aronia spoke to the ambassador about the European Union trade and tourism.
Hi there. We could confidently say that the Kingdom of the Netherlands, its government, its business sector and its citizens are among the warmest supporters of our country. It is evident by the numerous projects carried out and supported by the Embassy of the Netherlands and the rapidly developing trade relations between the two states. During the first 8 months of 2022, the trade turnover between the two countries grew by 20.9% to $136.6 million. Foreign direct investment is growing too. During the first 8 months of this year, Georgia received an FDI of $79 million from the Netherlands, representing a 30.8% growth year on year, with the energy sector leading the race. Interestingly, during the second quarter of 2022, Georgia received an FDI of $44.7 million, thus placing the Western European nation in the second place in the rankings. What drives the relations between the Netherlands and Georgia? What are the priorities of the Dutch Embassy? These are some of the questions I will discuss today with the Ambassador of the Kingdom of the Netherlands to Georgia, Her Excellency Maaike van Koldam. Greetings, it's a pleasure to have you here at BMG. Madam Ambassador, let's begin with the broadest question possible. It's been more than since your term as an ambassador to Georgia began, and this time you experienced the pandemic, you experienced the war in Ukraine. So how could you summarize these three years?
Well, as you say, it's been very hectic. Lots of things have happened in these 3 years. So one summary would be never a dull moment. There was the COVID period, which was very difficult for everybody in Georgia, for the people in the Netherlands, but we felt in very safe hands in Georgia. We were taken well care of, and I have great admiration how your medical staff did their utmost to protect people. And in spite of pandemic, of course I could not travel, I was limited in my movement, but since then I've been traveling a lot, I'm meeting far more people, I'm getting to know the regions of Georgia, and that is really a big privilege. And to sum it up, we actually kept doing what we always do. We support civil society, we continued our consular services, and we continued supporting businesses. And I'm really pleased to be here today to talk about the business side of it and any other element that you would like to discuss.
Apart from the pandemic and the war in Ukraine, there were rather series of events happening in Georgia related to Georgia's European integration. And the failure to receive the EU candidacy status. Instead of that, we received a 12-point recommendation letter from the EU, and several months have passed since then. So how would you rate the government's job ever since we received the document? What is going on and what more needs to be done?
Well, you mentioned the war in Ukraine, and I wanted to also, in relation to my first question, mention that that has, of course, a huge impact on the whole world. It's a horrible war after Russia's invasion, and it's just utter tragedy what's happening also today. So we totally condemn that. On the European perspective, that is a milestone. Georgia has European perspective, and that is a big step. And the 12 recommendations, they're to be taken very seriously, and I think everybody's working hard on that. And what we would like to do is, of course, we continue supporting Georgia in acting upon these 12 recommendations, and then it's important to have the legislation in place, to implement the legislation, but also to make it an inclusive process and involve for instance, civil society organizations, and also to make it a cross-party joint interest, because I think that's in the best interest of Georgia.
Would you say that the steps need to be taken faster at this point?
It's not up to me to put a time limit on it. It's very important that the steps are taken thoroughly, and that it's not just ticking boxes. It consists of various components, as I just mentioned. So I would say the best thing is to do it thoroughly in an inclusive way, and then I really do hope that we will see the progress that can be there.
Let's talk about trade relations between our two countries. As I mentioned in my introduction, the Netherlands is a very important, even strategic partner for Georgia in terms of trade relations. What are, based on your experience, based on your communication with Dutch investors and even Georgian companies too, what are the areas that Dutch investors are most interested in Georgia?
Well, obviously agriculture. The Netherlands is the second largest exporter of agriculture expertise and products, not even per capita, but just in absolute terms, which means we have a huge expertise to share, and we're eager to share that. We are sharing that with Georgian farmers and businesses. We do that in a very hands-on way, like we train farmers, we team up, we learn from each other. We do that in, for instance, seeds to make a better crop, higher quality, food safety on the implementation of the DCFTA, that's very essential, but also in the dairy industry. In logistics, we can team up. We have a big port in Rotterdam, and Georgia also has this aspiration to be a regional hub like the Netherlands is. So those are amongst two areas that are very interesting and things happening. But also, of course, tourism, that's very essential, hospitality sector. Dutch people love to come to Georgia, and I could go on, but yes, so we're working on all of that.
In general, how would you rate the investment climate here, and what could be done to bring more and more Dutch companies and Dutch investors to Georgia?
I think quite a lot of Dutch companies are doing well. What is important, though, for Dutch companies is to feel that their investment is secure and that there is equal level playing field for all companies, meaning that if you have a problem or an obstacle, that you can go to a court that looks at it totally independently. And for that, it is important that judiciary reform indeed happens, and there's already a lot being done, but I think it's in the recommendation, so we're looking at that. There is a link also to human rights. I think Georgia, we really appreciate the steps that have been taken in Georgia and very much support that. There was one day last year that was really a black day, was the 5th of July, the LGBTQI, the Pride, the aggression against media. That was a very black day, unfortunately. 6th of July was much better, and this year we've been very good Pride events, and we're very happy to see that and count on that protection to be provided in the years to come. And I'm mentioning this because it's a very important topic in our foreign policy, and it is also important for investors to see that not only their own staff is safe, but that it's an inclusive climate. And I think there's progress, and we're eager to keep supporting that. And there's also, I should mention, I hope I'm not jumping to your other questions, but for instance, what we do see in the financial sector, we have the Dutch Entrepreneurial Development Bank, FMO, and that just provided a huge loan agreement with Credo Bank, 100 million lari, and that's to provide loans to small and medium enterprise, youth, female entrepreneurs, and they do that because they have trust in the financial sector. So there is many fields where we team up and hope to get together in a very good place.
Another agricultural aspect of the business that I want to talk to you about is wine production. And just this week you visited.
I was.
Yeah, you visited the harvest. So, how acceptive of Georgian wine are the Dutch people in general, and what could we do to increase our exports to the Netherlands?
Well, you know, that's by far the easiest question of any interview, because Dutch people, they love Georgian wine. It's very famous. I think we should find more of it in our supermarkets. And having just been in Sinandali and at the Wine Fest, it's just magnificent. You see all these various producers, a huge variety of grapes, but I also met some very young entrepreneurs who think about their product, the packaging, the marketing, and that's just, that's a great diversity that I think should be even known better to the world and enjoyed.
So based on your experience and your communication with investors, what are the main challenges that they face in Georgia?
Challenges, well, there's a lot of opportunities. Again, there's the ease of doing business, to start a company, favorable tax climate, good trade agreements with other countries. Important element remains indeed the judicial reform. That I think is important, and also political stability. And when I speak about politics a little bit, though, in this broadcast, I think what's often mentioned is the polarization. And that's also why I said never a dull moment. And for someone from a Dutch background, we are a little bit more, well, we're slightly different, let's put it that way. But I do see that in spite of polarization, things happen. And I only wish that polarization could indeed also be diminished and to get to business together. But I must say that I have respect how the country manages to prosper and develop economically speaking in spite of very hard times, COVID, war in Ukraine, and all these challenges.
How easy is communication with the governmental agencies for Dutch investors here in Georgia?
I think there's this great enterprise Georgia, and I visited them, and they're very, very open to advice, to accompany companies, a very energetic director. So to have that kind of agency and that information available is very good. And I must say, in general, our counterparts at any level, administration, local, central government, are very open to us, and that is an important element. I feel very much at home as an ambassador, and I do feel that I can speak to many people and have a listening ear whenever, and that's really appreciated. Yes.
What are your plans for the remainder of this year?
Well, to do everything that I couldn't do in 2 years of COVID, to do that in the rest of the year. And it's because it's such a pleasure to be here, and I want to make the most of it, not for myself, of course, although I enjoy it, but for the country, for our bilateral relations. So we keep doing what we did, and we are going to do it even faster, better, more, and that is our support to civil society, our support to Dutch businesses, not to forget our consular services, our public diplomacy. We try to do cultural events because there's so many highly motivated and energetic counterparts. I can't wait to go out again and work with everybody because it's really a pleasure to work in Georgia.
That's very nice to hear. And what are your plans for the next year? Do you expect the situation change a little bit? Maybe you'll adjust your plans towards that?
Well, you know, this is maybe the hardest question of this interview, totally opposite to the lovely question on Georgian wine. A lot depends, of course, as well on the geopolitical context, the war in Ukraine, which I'm quite sure that Ukraine will win. It influences a lot. But as I just said, in spite of these challenging times, lots of things are continuing. So I intend to do what I did, to do it even more, and to be open to feedback what we could do even better, and to team up, also in line with these 12 action points or advice, to do that together, to keep supporting Georgia, because it's also our 30-year diplomatic relations between the Netherlands and Georgia, and I couldn't be in a better background than I'm here. So yes, that's also something that we celebrate, and we want to be a trusted friend and are a trusted friend of Georgia.
You definitely are. And my last question would be, you know, Georgia found itself in a very difficult situation globally,
Yes.
Because of geopolitics, because of economy, all of that. So what would your advice be to the country as a whole? You know, how should we behave in these difficult times? What should we do?
Well, I think having the European perspective, my advice would indeed be to implement those 12 recommendations, action points, because they're in essence will help Georgia in being a prosperous, democratic country, and a lot of that has been reached already. So my advice would be, if I am in the position to give an advice, but you're asking me to work on those, and Team Europe, we are part of Team Europe, is on Georgia's side, and I think, and by the way, also very relevant, financially speaking, we are, Georgia's in the constituency group of the Netherlands in World Bank, IMF and EBRD, and because of that, we have a lot of activities also between our ministries of finance, which will help. And last but not least, if I may, another 30 seconds of your time. Just last week, I was in Parliament because we have this twinning project. EU, Georgia, and the Netherlands participates in improving, enhancing financial oversight by Parliament in the budget sector. So we try to be in many, many different fields together. Well,
thank you very much, Madam Ambassador, for everything that you are doing, and we certainly hope to see Georgia in a better place quite soon. My guest today was the Ambassador of the Kingdom of the Netherlands to Georgia, Her Excellency Maaike van Koldam. As statistics tell us, the Netherlands is Georgia's crucial partner, so let's hope that in the years to come, the relationship between the two states will flourish not only politically, but economically and financially.
The Checkpoint is presented by GM Pharma, the first international multinational pharmaceutical company in Georgia. GM Pharma, to serve those who need it most.